Good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming out to the Rubin. I'm Tim McHenry. I direct programs here, and the Rubin Museum of Art is presenting a whole year of exploring what seems to be a singular idea, that the future is fluid. And in that fluidity, we also welcome on live stream our friends on Facebook. Thank you for joining us. And if you have questions, dial them in, as it were, and I'm sure our digital team will be happy to answer your questions in the process. But we've got many questions. That's probably why you've come here tonight. So what are we doing here? Why is the Rubin taking a whole year to explore something that always seems just ahead of us, the future? Seems pretty simple. Well, we challenge the idea that we're not actually so much as looking forward to the future as really remembering the future by anticipating the past. And taking the idea in Buddhism embodied by Padmasambhava, the tantric master whose experiences you can witness on the 6th floor tonight, and taking that idea and really understanding that the future ahead of you is decided largely by what you care to remember. And on Friday, we'll be opening an installation right here in the spiral by Candy Chang, which occupies the whole wall, and it invites you, the visitor, to write down your hope for the future and your anxiety about the future. And the hope goes on the blue board. The anxiety goes on the red board. Need I say more? So, fortunately, we've got two really remarkable individuals who've thought about the future, the past, and the present very deeply indeed. Laura Lynne Jackson is here with us tonight. She looks at herself as a mother, a teacher, but she also just happens to be a psychic medium. And so she has ventured into what we would think of as the unknown. She's taken that risk. She's dared to do that. And she's come back at the other side to engage with scientists about consciousness and about the state of mind that exists without the potential for body, but really importantly as a social worker to help people overcome grief and loss. And it's an incredibly important work that you do, Laura, and thank you so much for being here. Her first book was called The Light Between Us, and she'll be happy to sign books afterwards if you care to join her then. She is joined by Dr. Mark Epstein, who has a private practice here as a psychiatrist here in New York City, but very fortunately for the rest of us, he's made some of those private thoughts very public indeed in some really trenchant and deeply understood books that, again, to some extent, draw upon his understanding of Buddhist philosophy and translating it into 21st century terms, what you and I can do today and tomorrow with these ideas that were really crystallized so many thousands of years ago. His most recent book is Advice Not Given, A Guide to Getting Over Yourself. Something I think we could all do with, but there's one particular phrase that struck me that might actually set the tone for this evening, and I'll just read a short sentence of it. Dr. Epstein writes, "Past and future preoccupy us because we're trying to control things, while being in the present necessitates openness to the unexpected. Rather than resisting change by dwelling in the relative safety of our routine thoughts as we tend to do in our regular lives, when meditating, we practice going with the flow. We surrender to impermanence when we meditate, wherever it may lead." Let us have Dr. Mark Epstein and Laura Lynne Jackson lead us today. Thank you so much.
Hello.
Okay, everybody. This is unscripted. We did not plan anything out beforehand. except in my mind. So what I'm thinking is we could each introduce ourselves to those of you who don't really know either us or our work, and then we'll start to talk. Is that all right?
Sounds wonderful.
Okay, you go first.
Well, my name is Laura Lynne Jackson. First of all, I just want to say it is such an honor to be here. When I enter rooms and I speak with people, I feel energy. I feel a beautiful energy rush. So I feel each of your individual energy, and it kind of makes this beautiful sea of light. So thank each of you for being here tonight. I think we get invitations from the universe all the time. And then it's our job to either say yes or no. And each one of you accepted tonight's invitation to be here and be part of this experience and part of this conversation. So I'm really honored to also be part of this. I'm a mom, I am a wife, and I happen to be a psychic medium. And it took me many, many decades to come to terms with that and accept that. I don't consider myself woo-woo. I was raised by two teachers, and I was raised to be a critical thinker in the world, and a critical thinker always questions and explores. And so for me, having the abilities that I had to go on a journey to try to figure out what they were, how to honor them, and what my place was in the world because of them. And what the journey led me to discover was that the abilities I had, I think we all have. We just have to tune back into them. That's number one. But number two, they're meant to help people navigate their life paths here, because we all have these beautiful journeys that we're on. And I think when we understand that we're connected to one another and a higher realm, what I call the other side, it makes our experience more beautiful. And so I love having conversations about the nature of consciousness, the fluidity of time. So tonight is ideal for me. This is wonderful. Thank you.
And I'm Mark Epstein. I'm a psychiatrist, as Tim told you. I have a practice downtown. Some of the people I work with are in the room tonight, so that's wonderful for me. I had the fortunate for me experience of being introduced to Buddhism, of discovering Buddhism when I was still in college, early in college, quite young, pretty ignorant of much else in the world, and of really taking to it and exploring it as best as I was able in a period of 5, 6, 7 years before I surrendered and went to medical school with the idea of becoming a psychiatrist, which I did. And then I've spent a lot of time sort of on the side when I'm not seeing people individually, trying to work out my ideas about how the two worlds fit together, the Buddhist world that came to me first, and then the Western psychotherapy world that I've grown into. So that's where I'm at. We met on the telephone because of a friend of mine who's also here told me about a reading he had had with Laura Lynne, which she used to only do on the telephone. And I was like, I have to talk to her. And it took her a year to get back to me.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
She was busy already.
That was the universe aligning the perfect timing for us.
It was. And I've been telling part of this story already, and I'll just get it out of the way. And then 9 years ago, my father died of a malignant brain tumor that was only discovered after it was too late to do anything about. And my father was an academic physician and a scientist and a researcher, and did not believe in, he would certainly not be believing in any psychic medium stuff, and even the Buddhist stuff was like, he did not want to talk about it. He was proud of my writing and so on, but we never had real conversation about where my mind and heart, et cetera, was at. But we were friendly and cordial. It wasn't strained. But when he got this brain tumor, I suddenly realized, advice not given. This is the sort of the seed of this book. I realized we'd never really talked about what I might or might not understand from what I'd learned from Buddhism about what death is and how to navigate it. And I decided I would try to call him on the telephone from my office, which I did, and said to him, we've never talked about it, and I don't know if you want to hear, but here's what maybe if you do want to hear, I could try to tell you what I think might be true from what et cetera. And he was very nice. He's like, go ahead, you know. And I said something on the order of, you know, that feeling that's deep inside of you where you've always been the same, you know, when you were 20 or 40 or 60 or 80, if you close your eyes, you sort of know it, like when you're going to sleep at night, nothing's really changed, even though the body has changed. I said, what the Buddhists seem to say is that if you can learn to relax your mind into that place, which is kind of invisible, you can't really put your finger on it, but you could kind of ride that out when the body dissipates in death. And he was like, okay, darling, I'll try. And, sincerely. So that was 9 years ago. 6 years ago, I had my reading with Laura Lynne on the telephone. And after she does a kind of preliminary thing that maybe she'll explain to you about how the stuff comes through her, and she explains it, and then gives a sort of sense of your energy that she's receiving about you. But then the first thing she said, and I brought my notes along from, if you want to see, the first thing, I didn't record it, the first thing she said was, oh, your father's here. He says to tell you were right. And then she says, he says, you know, I thought I was smart before, which is like totally my father. I thought I was smart before, but now here where I am now, I'm really smart. Now when I want to know something, I just know it instantly. So there's nothing I would like hearing more than my father telling me I was right. But that was, so I had a whole reading with her then. And then some years later, she invited me to her book party for this book that Tim told you about. And then I had one more reading with her 3 years ago. And that's been the extent of our communication. But it's been so helpful, both of the readings, that any lingering doubts that I might have had from my scientific upbringing and, you know, my basic belief that my older belief before Buddhism that when you die, it's just over and it's a blankness, and, you know, and then my sense from Buddhism that, oh, maybe that might not be true, and like, you know, all these weird connections that have happened in my life, etc. So that's sort of where I wanted to go first, is to, even though I've talked too long already.
No, not at all.
To ask you, like, what do the people once the people get to the other side, like, what do they want us to know that we didn't know or that we don't know? Like, what are you hearing?
Yeah, it's such a beautiful question to ask. I've learned so much through the readings that I've done. I said, you know, I'm a student all the time, every single time I do a reading, and I'm learning these beautiful ways that we're meant to live in the here and now, and how we're meant to connect to one another. To give you just a few of the broad things they have taught me, is that we are all here on earth having a collective lesson in love. And so any opportunity we have to give our love and kindness to someone else, or receive somebody else's love, that's the whole point of life. In a nutshell, the highest ways that we can be, the highest feelings we can have when we're here, and the feelings that will always lead us to our highest and our best paths are forgiveness and gratitude, coupled with love. And so that simple advice has helped me navigate my own path and my own understanding of things. They've also shown me that things that will never make sense to us in the here and now about our lives or about our experiences make sense in the most beautiful way once we've crossed. Because our lives, so many of us look at our lives, you know, in such a myopic way. We only focus on our own life and what we deem to be a success or a failure from this very limited view that we have of what we've achieved or not achieved. And we fail to see the bigger picture. But when you cross, you get to see the bigger picture in an instant. And you understand how many other lives you are always intertwined with, and how many moments of connection you had that influenced or helped somebody else on his or her path. It's the most beautiful understanding, and it happens honestly, instantly. Time doesn't exist there as it does here. And I know we talk a little bit about the nature of time, but time is a measure that we use to learn our lessons and have this collective lesson in love here. And so understanding that fundamentally what you take with you is love. It's everything else filters out and you take love. And also doing readings for individuals that I've done, the information that would come through would frame their experiences that they had in their lives, some that were very painful, in the most beautiful, beautiful way. It all had to do with forgiveness and connection and understanding. And I think some of us, we hold on to these scripts about ourselves that we have hidden deep inside. In my book, I wrote about this really profound experience this one woman, Joanne, had. I was doing a reading for her, and her father came through. And he brought through information first, but then he insisted that I tell her. He showed me a picture of a little kitten. I get like a kind of widescreen TV when I read. It goes on in my mind, and I see pictures, images. They make me feel things. And he said I needed to deliver this message, really powerfully. This was really important to tell her the kitten was all right. And she broke down in tears on the phone because apparently when she was a very little girl, she had gone and taken a kitten and dropped it off her 6th floor balcony to see if it would land on its feet, and it died. She never confessed that to anybody, but she held this deep pain within her that she was somehow this horrible, haunted person. And her father from the other side was saying, no, forgive yourself. You were a child. You didn't understand. The kitten is fine. That's the thing that they teach me that's most important, is that we spend so much time and energy here fearing death. And in the end, yes, bodily death is real, but death is not real in the sense that our consciousness stays completely intact and alert the whole time. And so when you cross, you're no longer confined by these heavy, cumbersome bodies that have their own limitations. You can only be in one place at one time. When you cross and you become, your consciousness not tied to these bodies, you can be in more than one place at one time. And you have this deep understanding of how your life connected with everybody else's. I don't know if you ever heard that term life review, but that's how they explain it to me. We each have a life review and we see those connections. So that's just the tip of kind of the iceberg of what they have taught me about our purpose here, our connection here, and how we need to interact both with each other, but also within ourselves.
So just... This may be only me wanting to know this, but how do you reconcile, like, my father there talking, or how do you reconcile that the ancestors seem to be present, at least to you, available, with the more traditional notion, at least in Buddhism, of life after life and reincarnation and so on?
Oh, I completely believe in reincarnation. I wasn't raised with that spiritual belief, but every time I did the reading and on my journey, I became very aware that that's true. Life, this earth is a school for our souls. And what's really interesting too is I think there's some fluidity between the past, the future, the present, all of that. Because what they've showed me, and when I say they, I'm talking about, this is going to sound woo-woo, my spirit guides. We all have spirit guides. There are teachers, mentor, like higher angelic spirits on the other side. Nobody we knew this lifetime just contracted with us. Throughout time and history, religions have called them guardian angels. You can call them whatever you like. I refer them as spirit guides. And what they've told me is they've said, okay, Laura, we're going to try to explain it to you, but just keep in mind that trying to explain it to you is like you try and explain algebra to your dog. But we'll try to dumb it down enough for you here. And what they showed me, because they'll use my frame of context, they showed me, do you know what a maypole is? And they'd have strings and you'd go around. They said, think of it this way. Your soul energy, your light energy is part of the greater light energy, but it divides out into these strings of different lifetimes where you're playing a role. But it's all tied on the other side. That's our true home. And it's all happening, are you ready for this, at the same exact time. So the lives that you're having, they're all intertwined. We have like linear time here, but on the other side, it's very, very different. I've tried to wrap my mind around this. I've even started studying maybe the science that could help explain this. I think the quantum physicists are going to solve this all and prove, consciousness exists after bodily death. There's this kind of fringe theory there, called retrocausal quantum theory. And it basically, they look at how light goes through a barrier. It either has to choose to be a particle or a wave. And what they found is that, and you can Google this after, it'll be much better for you to read it, in a scholarly way than for me to explain it. But what they have undeniably proven through doing these light experiments is that the future and the present affect the past, which is mind-boggling. But it makes sense with how they explain it to me. So all our lifetimes that we have, it's our way of learning this collective lesson in love, and it's all connected to one another. And I do think that soul groups get born into lifetimes together. You know, we're kind of on these teams of light.
Yeah, I was in Hawaii last year with Ram Dass, who was a teacher of mine, friend of mine many years ago, and I hadn't seen him in 20 years. He loves talking about this kind of stuff, and he had a spirit guide years ago named Emmanuel, whose favorite thing to say was, "Death is like taking off a tight shoe."
Yes. Yes.
But he was talking to me about
smart spirit guide.
Ram Dass was saying that we come in pods. He was like using like pods of people, pods
soul
of
groups,
spirit.
yeah.
Yeah. And those kind of conversations, like from the Buddhist point of view, you know, Buddhism, the psychology of Buddhism is all about no soul, no self, you know, emptiness. And so a lot of people who are deep into Buddhist thought are operating under the, I think, mistaken premise that their self or their soul or even their spirit is not real in an ultimate way. You know, so they're trying always to get rid of that sense of something, you know, that I was trying to talk to my father about. But these kinds of conversations have opened up my feeling about all of that, so that now I think the Buddhist idea about no self is, you know, that we all individually take ourselves to be more real than they actually are in the way that you're starting to describe. Like only identifying with this, you know, this life, these worries, these problems, these obstacles, etc. But that there is something that we could start calling a soul that wouldn't contradict Buddhist thought. You know, the soul that they were negating isn't necessarily the soul that you're talking about. But what is the, like, so do you find, like, you're talking consciousness when you say that consciousness, well, here's more of my question. Like, who decides the soul tests? You, right?
Yeah, you know, I think that we decide our soul test, and I think when we cross, but we're all together, you know. I think it all aligns, because while we have these individual experiences, we're all part of the same whole. The way they showed it to me is we're all different leaves on different branches of the same tree. And when we cross, we can download somebody else's consciousness, their entire life experience in a millisecond. And when we get that download, we're experiencing everything they did in just this moment, in this blink. And so truly, what has happened to them really happens to us. We're all the same. We're all connected. And I think in that sense, we really are just one giant soul that's been shattered into all these points of light to have these experiences to rise back together. And I think it's once we understand that, you know, what they've taught me about true success in the here and now, it's not about having more than somebody. It's not about having power over someone. True success is finding and honoring the gifts you came here with, that you came programmed with, sharing them with others, and helping elevate others so we all rise, you know, together in this really beautiful and profound way. I don't know if I've answered your question, though.
Yeah.
What was the question?
Well, finding the gift. Well, what the soul test. Finding the gifts that you came here with. I like that a lot.
But you wanted to know about soul tests, because sometimes when
you use that language.
Yeah, I do see soul tests, and I see soul cycles. So, you know, when I read, like I said, I kind of dissolve myself, and I go into this other place, which is so liberating, because I get to leave my ego behind. Sometimes I'll kind of be aware that I'm tied to myself. I'll be like, oh, look at poor little Laura. She's so limited. Like, oh, look what she's going through. And I have that awareness, and it's really wild when that happens. But I think that we choose to challenge ourselves sometimes, and it's always about love. It's, you know, every single decision you will ever have here, you're in your life, boils down to one of two choices. You either take the fear path, or you take the love path. And the fear path hides and disguises itself in other ways sometimes, but it's always, it will bring your kind of soul energy, your vibrational energy down if you will I could describe it that way. It's what will happen then, or what if this power is taken away from me, or what if XYZ does or doesn't happen. And the love path, you don't have to be happy when change happens, but you do have to understand that there's this greater force that connects us all, and it's the universe guiding you to a new experience, and that there's beauty and there's a lesson in that. And the minute you kind of surrender to that and open to it and trust in that, magical things can happen. And so I think there are many challenges that we face here. I also think we're the answer for one another. I think when we go through hardships here that cripple us,
ask you about next.
you know, they cripple our energy. It's the people who step up in love, sometimes who are complete strangers, that teach us our greatest lessons. So I think we are both the question and the answer for one another.
Like, we've shared a few people who've had terrible losses, like when a child dies suddenly, unexpectedly, and they've, you know, those people have ended up in my office, and they've sometimes ended up seeing you or talking to you and getting help from you. How do you, like, what's the point of the trauma? You know, is it just is it just random or karmic events that we, in this world, we can't do anything about? It's part of the lesson. But how do you process it with people?
I think for me the bigger question is, how can that possibly make sense?
Yeah.
You know, the loss of a child, I can't imagine a greater loss, and I think it profoundly shifts and changes everything about your life if that happens. So how could it possibly make sense? Why would this, you know, this loving force, this universe, this God, allow something like that to happen? And the Laura version of me doesn't have an answer, because I'm stuck in that the grief feeling for other people and how senseless it is. But I can only share with you what I've been told from children who have crossed and from the other side. And what they have told me is it's all a lesson in love, profound love. And that our grief also is that cord of love and connection. They've said it this way too. Look, in the end, it's always a happy ending, because death isn't real. And so when we leave our bodies, we realized, I'm going to be reconnected with that soul. I'm going to see my son or my daughter, whoever it is you've lost. And that connection is so solid and real. They've explained it like our lifetimes here are almost like a virtual reality experience. And the minute we cross, it's like all of you sitting there watching this take place, and right after, we're going to all meet each other right off the stage. It's that sort of experience where they don't have, those people who have crossed don't have a sense of loss, but we have a profound sense of loss. And so I would say the only way to look at it is to look at the cords of love that were left here. You know, I've heard the most amazing stories from children on the other side saying, here's all the people that helped me when I was ill. And that experience of feeling that unconditional love taught my soul something. Here's what they're doing in my name. And I'm a team of light with these people now, and my energy is still infused in that. And we're doing kindness, good things in the world in my name. My influence is still there, you know, and they'll talk about things that they've changed. I've had children on the other side tell me that their parents were involved in, you know, changing laws here and saving lives of people in the future. We're all in this sort of energy together. And so I don't think it will ever make sense when you're here. But I think the minute you shed your physical body and you're your consciousness and you get to see the person, you're like, oh, okay. You know, but we can't have that knowledge until that happens. So we're really in this place where we struggle to find the meaning, and we look for how it could make any sense. And I think it requires a very, very deep amount of faith and trust in the universe and in connection and in love, ultimately.
What about people we don't want to see again?
I get that a lot when I do readings. You know, they'll be like, just don't let my mother-in-law come through, you know, or tell me I'm not going to be stuck with so-and-so. And, you know, from what I see, energy is real. And think of it like musical notes. Or think of it, I always say energy is like a lake to me. I like to use that analogy. Like at the top, the sun's shining, there's like diamonds sparkling, people are water skiing and laughing and ha ha ha, everything's wonderful. And then you go a little deeper and it gets colder and darker. And you keep going, it gets darker, darker, colder. And at the bottom, there's just like muck and who knows what else. And certain people have certain energy that falls on that scope. And if you are of the energy at the top, you'll never see the fish swimming down here because you just can't even possibly reach each other. And so I think that there are certain evolutions that take place on the other side as well. This is what they've shown me. It's almost like, some people have described it like an apartment building. Some people's at the pet house, some's on lower floor. You know, it's that sort of thing. And your consciousness will always know where that is, but you wouldn't be connected like that energetically because you're learning different lessons and you're doing different, you know, you have a different purpose, or you're exploring in a different way.
Like
know?
I've heard you say in readings that people have let me listen to, like, oh, your ex-wife, she's got a really bad energy. Like it's good you're not in touch with her.
Do you mean
anymore.
in the here and now?
In the in the here and now. She's not on the other side. Just in the but she's in the past. But so some of those relationships get like completed. Do you think? Like,
what? You know, I think, so sometimes when I read for people too, I'll see that the first thing I see when I open to their energy is in an individual, if I'm doing a one-on-one reading, is I'll see what I call a core aura. And in that circle, that's just a term I came up with for it, I'll see either one or more colors. And depending on how it's arranged and what's in there, it's an entire language for me. So in a millisecond, I can kind of download this blueprint for the person's soul. And I will see a lot of things. And if I see the color purple arranged in a certain way, what I know is that the person I'm reading for is an advanced soul who has come here as a teacher and a healer and has also contracted with somebody else's soul who wasn't as evolved. And usually it's a contract to be born with one or more parent who's less evolved, or a romantic relationship that's less evolved. And I call those people purple energy. And the beautiful possibility there is that the purple energy, because of, you know, the elevated souls being a point of love in that person's life, they have the ability to kind of master their soul test and grow. I will also tell you 95% of the time those purple energy do not master their soul test and grow, so it makes the person I'm reading for's life very difficult in a way. But we can't be in control of each other's soul journeys and tests. We can't take each other's soul tests for each other. So at some point, there's usually a time period allotted, and then it's released. And it's also our job to recognize and release when we can no longer help. We're not meant to drag our time down. That's why sometimes I'll see soul cycles, I call them. I'll get a timeline for the person I'm reading for, and I'll see, you know, from age, 17 to 24, you were learning this lesson. This is what they're telling me that you were focused on in your soul cycle. And then you've been in this one, and then, you know, you're about to enter another one next year, and it'll be a 7-year soul cycle. It's almost a theme, if you will. And I think there are certain people that are brought into our lives at certain times to explore those lessons and that understanding. You know, there's the concept of people that you meet. Are they a lesson for you? Are you a lesson for them, or does it go both ways? You know, it's either a lesson or a blessing. Some people say too.
I sometimes have patients who it's really not right for them even to be in touch with a given parent or someone they were in a relationship with. Then there's a lot of guilt about you needing to keep them away, but you can see that that's sometimes the right.
Yeah, and I love that you use the word guilt, because that's a really powerful lesson that I've learned from doing the readings, is that guilt serves no one, ever. It just sits there and it sludges you down and it's awful. And there are moments that part of your soul journey and your soul test is to understand toxic energy and relationships and free yourself from it, not in a mean way, but with love and understanding that you can't fix that for that individual. But if you stay allowing yourself to be almost attacked energetically, it's going to shred your energy a bit, and you're not on your highest path then. So I think giving yourself permission to let go of relationships that are toxic and are of a lower energy is so important.
Okay, here's another question. We're sort of all conditioned by psychotherapy to think that our personalities, our characters, our difficulties are somehow the responsibility of the people who raised us, or that that our first 5 years that we can't really remember, but conditioned us in such a way that that's what makes us who we are. But I have more and more started to question that in my work, not to diminish the influence of family and mothers and fathers and siblings and early trauma and all the things that people come to therapy for, but that people seem to be not totally explicable by that. and that to be focused exclusively on excavating that or trying to repair what might have gone wrong early in this life might not do justice to what we're here for. So I'm just wondering how, I sort of know what you might say based on what you've said already, but I'd kind of like to hear it anyway.
Well, I think we're born into the families we're born into because our soul has chosen that experience or that test or that lesson is meant to happen for us. And whether you have an extraordinarily beautiful, gifted, loving childhood or a traumatic one, it does affect your path going forward. I think one of the reasons we're here is to exercise our free will. And from what I understand from the other side, free will trumps everything. We may not be able to choose what happens to us all the time. There are certain points of light that have to happen to each of us. It's almost like a connect the dots. But what we do control is how we embrace what happened. And I think, again, the lesson there is forgiveness, love. Sometimes forgiveness of yourself, of others, and focusing on love and finding a way to navigate your world without guilt by confronting the grief and moving through it and past it. It's almost like our childhood lays like the slab, like the foundation. But what we build on that's up to us. So I think it's so complicated, and you can't ever separate yourself from your childhood, but you also have such a path ahead of you to explore and create whatever picture you want from that. So I think it's they're meshed together in a profound way, but your childhood and the family you're born into does not ever define the course of your life or who you become.
And what do you think the place of art and music and creative work of all kinds, like how does that fit into?
Oh, I love this question. I love this question so much. So I have a lot to say about art from the other side. What they have shown me is that, so when I see creativity, I see it as the color orange, and I see that in people's energy. I can see if they came here with an artistic gift or more than one. And what I also know then is they also need to bring art into their world, but this applies to everybody. When we bring art into our energy, it's like turning the brightness up on our connections to each other, to the universe. I know, because I feel it, when somebody creates a work of art, whether it's a painting or a song or whatever it will be, there's this beautiful channel that has come through them. No artist works alone. Every artist works with this beautiful team of light and this download from the other side. You know, just to give you a little, just talk about one particular, a literary work, J.K. Rowling talks about how she got the entire download, she called it a download for the Harry Potter series in this flash on a train. And I was like, that makes perfect sense. That was the team of light giving her the download. Even sometimes when you write a book, it just instantly comes through. When you're painting something, it comes through you. You're the vehicle, it comes through. But it's connecting and creating with a much higher realm. And when we then experience art, whether we're looking at a painting or we're listening to a song, and music is one of the greatest ways to experience, I'll explain that in a moment, we connect with this grand grid of light, to the creator of it, the artist here who created, to the team of light on the other side, and to everybody else who has viewed it and enjoyed it. And what the other side has told me is that the way to heal our societies and the way to advance our societies is to embrace art. Now, we're in a very sad way because in the United States, like in grade school, elementary, all of this, gym class is mandated, but art class isn't. And if you look at the cultures and the societies that had the greatest expansion of thought, ideology, and connectedness and all of this, it's times when the arts were fostered and encouraged and celebrated. So truly, art is the answer to everything in a way. And when we bring it into our energy, that lights us up, and then we can become a better version of ourselves. Music will shift your energy completely. It will clear your kind of vibration. It can shift how you're thinking. It influences and affects you. And even if you're the worst singer in the world, please go sing a song you love. Because when that vibration comes through you, it's incredible. It really is. So art is truly so necessary and so needed, both creatively allowing yourself to explore and also drinking in as much art as you possibly can.
And what about anxiety? What's the point of anxiety?
Well, anxiety, I think, the interesting part is I think anxiety takes place in this monkey brain chatter part, which is your frontal lobe. I love to work with scientists. I told you it was a very long journey to come to understand my abilities, and part of that included, going to a psychiatrist, making sure I wasn't crazy, and then working with scientists to try and figure out what is different about my brain that I'm able to do this, because I think it has implications for all of us, and I truly think we could all do this. And what they found is that when I go from somewhat normal mode, they told me my brain doesn't look normal even when I'm in normal mode, but mostly I'm in that frontal lobe. In the frontal lobe, all the brainwave activity there is analytical thinking, thoughts, language, math, skills, everything we learn once we start formal schooling around age 5 and up, which is why kids are very, very psychic, and then all of a sudden they're not. And what I think happens too is that when I read, what they showed me is my entire frontal lobe turns off. The brainwave activity silences. It looks like I am not conscious. When I go into reading mode, psychic and then mediumistic, and different parts of my brain light up. And I think we all have that capacity to connect in that way. And I think anxiety it's getting you stuck here. It's getting you stuck in this frontal lobe, and you're not able to trust that there is a plan. You're not able to trust that your life isn't just how you're seeing it and how you're trying to figure out. There's a surrendering that needs to happen. I think when we surrender everything to the other side, and it's a feeling more than it is a word, we shut off that part. We connect in a much deeper way, and the anxiety will dissipate. It's when we think we're in control and that we have to have the answer and we have to work it out a certain way, and if this doesn't happen, oh my God, my whole life is going to fall apart. That's when we have problems. It's when we start getting stuck in ourselves.
So I like, that's a sort of conventional description of, too much thinking, self-preoccupation, too much ego, etc., and that there's something intuitive that can happen when, but what you're doing differently is connecting it to what you're calling the other side, or to a team of light, or like, so you've actually had that visceral experience.
Yeah, but I think part of my point is, this is what the scientists have told me. They said we all have a switch in our brain that can shut this down and help us connect with, some people call it our higher selves, God, whatever you want to call it, this higher energy of love and connectedness. It's just that I know where it is. I think we all have it. And I think next time any of you are feeling very anxious or very caught up in a moment, try to take a deep breath in, because breathing really can help kind of all our energies aligned. I always say we have, like, I say it's BME, body, mind, and soul, as a triangle linked together. But breathing seems to like balance, like very deeply in through your nose and out through your mouth, like 4 times. You're going to find that anxiety and the chatter goes down, because whether or not you realize it, you're connecting with this higher kind of source and power. It is not unique to me.
Yeah.
We can all do it. So it's been an interesting learning experience for me, because it's helped me in a very practical way. But I struggle with it sometimes too. I'll get very caught up in the here and now and the anxiety, and then I'll take a moment and I'll release it, and it's beautiful when you release it.
And where is that what you're calling the other side, and where when you get messages from, like, where are they?
It's a great question. Where are they? Where is the other side?
It's not such a great question. It's a stupid question.
No, it's a great question, because some people picture it like, you look up at the clouds, you're like, oh, But out there, if you start looking at NASA, it keeps going.
Yeah.
Like, there's no, the other side is right on top of us. The way they've shown it to me is like a piece of paper. We're here, they're here. Like, think of a tissue. It's that thin. And we can also connect with it because it is right here with us. Have you ever seen, the other way that I've tried to describe it, have you ever seen one of those pictures? They were very popular in the 90s, or like a little bit before. And if you looked at a certain angle, it was one picture, and then you went this way, and it was like a piece of paper, like it was a whole nother picture. That's the other side. It's right here. It's right now. It's not this grand separation so far away. Right with us.
And what about dreams?
I think this is what happens when you dream. It's amazing, because that frontal lobe goes offline. And so, like it or not, you're able to connect with the other side. I have a theory about sleep too. I don't think we sleep just to rest our physical bodies. I really think if we're like cell phones, we need to recharge with our spirit, soul energy on the other side as well. And that is one of the number one times that your chatter is quieted, and so you will get your own messages. A lot of times in dreams, you will get very symbolic dreams, and it will be the energy or the feeling behind it, and also the symbolism that matters, because on the other side, there's no English. When I translate what I'm hearing, it's this emotional language that I then translate into English. I will connect with people whose relatives spoke, Chinese or Russian, and they'll let me hear the language for a moment so I can identify and tell the sitter, but then I'll understand completely what they're saying. Animals too. Animals cross, and I do get messages. They'll tell me all sorts of things. And I will hear at times like words and things, but the language of the other side is really emotional and symbolic. So that will happen in our dreams. And in our dreams too, we also have visitations from people we love from the other side. We're all mediums. You know, it's just, you have to get rid of like all this to recognize and allow it to happen. And so I always say visitation dreams feel very much 3D, and they're an experience. You feel like you've experienced it, and you wake up and it's still vivid in your like mind and in your energy, where you know you were just with this person that you love. And usually in the dreams too, there's no dialogue. It's just telepathic. You understand the thoughts. Quick show of hands, how many people have experienced that? Pretty neat.
I'm conscious of the time, because that's one of my jobs in life. So I've developed creative ways of saying that time is up. We have a lot of time for questions and so on. I just want to ask you one more thing.
Sure.
About drugs and alcohol. Like what, you know, like what are they here for? Or, not medication drug, I'm not asking, you know, like Western medicine or anything, but the sort of power that they have over us, or the need that we have for them.
Well, I think there's a different like extent to like every now and then in a recreational way versus people who really end up with addiction. Because, you know, when I talk about that lake and vibrational energies, when we take drug into our energy systems, what I see for all of us is always we're connected to each other with these cords of light and to the other side. And when you go into heavy drugs, those cords dim and you disconnect, and then you feel so, you're not tapping into the purpose that you're here. So that's with drug abuse or with heavy drugs. But I think recreationally, if somebody has a drink now and then, I think what they're really doing is they're shutting this up for a moment. And here's the ironic thing. There's a magic little formula that psychic mediums know. It's 2 drinks within a 90-minute period, and the information just flows. But if you go past that, it's no. I would, you know, not recommend that. That's it. It'll shut down after that. But I think that there's some switch there that it kind of alleviates. And for some people who maybe drink regularly, maybe they're tapping into that a little bit. But I also think the whole idea of drugs too is we're here to help each other. And I think that people who turn to that are usually in extraordinary pain, and they, instead of confronting that pain, they try to distance themselves from it. But when we get into addiction, in order to distance themselves from the pain, they're distancing themselves from all the cords of light at the same time. It goes hand in hand, so it's never the answer.
I like the image of the cords of light.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so good. Well, we have a lot of time for you guys.
We certainly do, and hands are going up already. I see one in the first row. I have the privilege of actually asking the first question because I'm really curious. Because I've got a microphone right here. Laura Lynne, you were very emphatic about your upbringing, your